Stories typically follow a regular structure. An event occurs which incites a response from the main character. That response resolves the immediate problem for good or ill while revealing another challenge that is either more difficult or requires a very different set of skills to resolve. This pattern of cause and effect, problem solution, consequences, new problem, keeps repeating 3 or 5 times typically until we reach the climax of our story, in which our protagonist must overcome a final challenge that will either fully resolve the web of complications which has been spun over the course of the rising action, or if they fail, will result in catastrophe. In a horror story, we'll often see a combination of these, in which the initial conflict has been solved, but at a great cost. We can see this cycle repeat again and again throughout Alan Wake, almost to the point of annoyance. This is partially due to the structure and genre conventions of the narrative. Alan Wake is a fusion of horror novels, surrealistic episodic television, and third-person survival horror video games. So the structure of all three must be woven together in a way which ultimately satisfies gamers without losing the characteristics of other kinds of storytelling. Back in the day of level-based shooters like Wolfenstein 3D, it was taken as a given that players would reset their loadout at the beginning of each mission. But as the character progression of role-playing games and that desire for a consistent narrative began working their way into other genres, it became harder to justify just resetting a player's power level and dropping them into a new murder maze every 30 minutes or so. Here in episode 2 of Alan Wake, the power curve is reset several times in rhythm with narrative complications. We begin with a recapitulation of the game's inciting event. Alice has disappeared from a cabin that hasn't existed since the 1970s. With the complication that Alan cannot fully cooperate with the police because he has both forgotten an entire week of time and experienced supernatural events which, at the very least, are going to make him sound like a madman. After about half an hour of what basically amounts to interactive cutscenes, which remove all chance of Alan still carrying his weapons from the night before, the game then provides us with Rusty's revolver. It tosses a few Taken at us and throws us into that mini boss fight against the Taken Rusty to kickstart the action. Then it sends us on a long walk through the forest towards Lover's Peak, where Alan expects to meet the kidnapper. Inciting event, complication, violent solution, followed by further complications. These all occur in order, and they will again, because that is how the story goes. The fact that Alan is a writer and the kidnapper knows the events which are occurring are related to a supernatural manuscript does a lot to complicate this situation, though, and improve the quality of the storytelling. The segment in which we travel to Lover's Peak is a compressed version of the same pattern we followed in the nightmare end on the first night. We travel along paths that first wind through the forest and cross bridges, and along this course we confront three main groups of taken enemies. Things are a little more fluid this time, and there are some opportunities to explore off the main path, discovering manuscript pages, park signs that especially tell us some of the details of the uncanny history of Bright Falls. And of course, there are the weapons caches. But there are essentially three unskippable encounters along the trail from the visitor center to the gondola. There's the picnic area, the Great Old One, and the Through Tree, with several other taken dotted along the path or spawning from the trees if we explore too far from the main trail that connect each of these encounters. These fights also follow a typical escalation pattern. The picnic encounter is really only challenging because of the enemies who spawn behind us and some weirdness with the cinematic camera. The fight at the Great Old One features a heavy lumberjack, and there are also some support taken to distract us. So that fight can be a little bit of a challenge if you didn't explore and find the extra ammunition or the flare gun. But it's really the multiple taken who spawn after the Great Old One fight on that switchback trail down to the bridge that present the biggest challenge for me. The next major fight is the most difficult of this part of the game. It is the fight at the Through Tree. This is the most difficult and the third of these encounters, with three powerful taken, all spawning in simultaneously. I have managed to complete this fight a couple of times, but the easiest path for me is to run forward to the safety of the light on the far side of the Through Tree, and then, with my game saved and a light at my back, return to explore the signage and kill the taken. It is, of course, possible to beat the taken at the Through Tree on your first pass through, if you've got a lot of patience and you're well stocked with optional supplies. I appreciate these encounters that are really difficult to complete unless you've got a lot of patience or are very well stocked with supplies from finding all of the hidden caches. In part because they help to remind us that we're not playing as an action hero. We're playing as an irritable author. Likewise, the opportunity to explore side paths such as a gigantic cross-section of a fallen tree with the age rings labeled to show the size of the tree during important events in the backstory of the town. These provide us with both key background details and delicious world building in an in-character manner. The challenge in implementing this kind of game design and storytelling, it comes in large part from ensuring that players continue to feel powerful and capable without over-empowering them to the point that this horror game just becomes a carnival shooting gallery. So how do developers change the pace? How do they make you feel threatened again after 20 minutes of feeling more and more and more confident? That's where we get to the concept of player disempowerment. In general, most folks don't like to feel weak. Many of us play video games to escape from the brutal day-to-day grind of a day job or daily chores. We spec out a character who is capable of achieving feats of brain and brawn that really only a circus performer or rare genius might have in real life. Then, we set off to fight enemies who could slay the average person with their wind-up blow. We collect magic boxes that give us extra hearts. and shake off bone-shattering falls or life-threatening wounds in the time it takes for our hands to stop trembling on the controller. And then we set out to do it all over again, watching as the damage numbers go up and the enemies fall before us. But constant escalation isn't really sustainable. Every genre has some method of pushing back against the player, be it bosses in JRPGs having health pools that reach into the millions, or roguelikes outright killing the player and saying, here's a small bonus, go do it again, and you'll die again, but you'll earn another bonus before you die and you'll get just a little further. The grind becomes such an expected feature of most role playing games that anytime a game comes out which doesn't require mastering a complex combat system or carefully building your character to speed them through at least 30 hours of entertainment, the internet kind of explodes over whether it's acceptable to pay $70 for a short or less interactive experience. Finding that perfect balance of focused narrative progression, challenge, and side content is one of the most difficult parts of building a game or of telling a story. Being both an older survival horror game and deeply influenced by other mediums, Alan Wake takes the approach of using narrative reasons and set pieces to disempower players for portions of its runtime. After letting you feel powerful or frustrated for long sequences of battles, the game drains our ammunition with a big fight or takes away all of our weapons during a cutscene. Dumping Alan off of a damaged high-wire gondola and having him drop his gun as the Taken close in from the shadows is a dramatic reversal of the power curve. Choosing to have him be rescued by the hunter who mocked him on the ferry back at the beginning of episode 1? That sets us up for a narrative twist that will carry us through episodes 2 and 3, as that man is immediately revealed to be the kidnapper. Experienced readers, viewers, and gamers alike will recognize that a new character appearing in these circumstances is going to either be a long-term ally or a villain in disguise. So of course Alan Wake, the famous novelist, recognizes what is happening. The developers respect our intelligence enough to not try and play with the trope of forcing us to become friends with an obvious villain, only to shockingly reveal their villainy after the audience has already been screaming, "He's going to betray you," for at least an hour. We're even given the objective of follow the kidnapper. So it's a classic setup. Two men who ought to be enemies are forced to work together for the common cause of their survival. Alan's motives are obvious, in that he wants the kidnapper to survive because he wants his wife back. But what about the kidnapper? He wants Alan to give him the finished manuscript to departure. His reasons are a bit muddled, perhaps even more so after they are fully revealed in the next episode. But from the very moment that Alan recognizes the man from the ferry as the one who left Alice's driver's license in the abandoned junker behind the sheriff's station, he knows that this is the kidnapper. But there's more to it than respecting the audience's intelligence. Because the kidnapper has a specific answer to almost all of Alan's questions. That's how the story goes. He's not just being meta. This isn't breaking the fourth wall and winking at the audience. No, the kidnapper knows about the manuscript for departure. He's even read parts of it. Initially, this is only hinted at, as there's little opportunity for deep conversation while fending off the Taken with nothing but a flashlight and some road flares. But by the end of the confrontation at Lover's Peak, he'll be demanding that Alan turn over the completed manuscript to a book that Alan can't even remember beginning to write. Before we can get to that, however, there is the matter of the team-up sequence, because that's how the story goes. From the moment Alan falls off of the cable car until he eventually punches the kidnapper off of the Lover's Peak viewing platform, he is armed with nothing more than a flashlight and road flares. The kidnapper tells Alan to point his flashlight at the Taken and use the flares if they get too close. And that's all we can do. Alan repeatedly demands a gun, and the kidnapper repeatedly refuses to give him one. This whole sequence is really effective at disempowering, even intentionally frustrating players. From the moment that we pull a handful of flares from the emergency box, the game shakes up our fighting style and proves the effectiveness of flares and the flashlight at both burning away the Taken's shields and discouraging them from approaching. The problem is that we have to deal with repeated interruptions from the cinematic camera as we carefully direct the kidnapper to shoot the correct Taken. NPC companions and escort missions have been around for decades, and they've been enraging players with glitchy AI, bad companion aim, and exhausting monologues ever since Yoshi blithely ran into a pit within seconds of accidentally pressing the dismount button in Super Mario World. This section of Alan Wake creates some of the best disempowered tension I've experienced in a video game, but it doesn't quite know when to stop. As we move up the path, the tension of having to work together with our enemy to take down these incoming monsters is some of the most natural buddy combat that I've experienced in a video game. Especially as the kidnapper actually shoots at the Taken that we illuminate and seems engaged in the fight. It's also relatively short-lived and pretty linear. So there are few opportunities for faulty pathfinding or glitchy character animations. Armed with nothing but the light, the player must fend off the Taken, burning through their shields, and then moving on to concentrate on the next target. Even the inexplicably blocked staircase, where we use flares to hold off the Taken for a fixed amount of time until the kidnapper has pried away all of the boards, it works for me because the delay is brief. And the tension of having to run up the stairs to the next electric light as overwhelming numbers of angry shadows approach really does feel like a good standoff in a zombie movie. This begins to break down, however, when we actually arrive at the viewing platform and must contend with waves of heavy enemies lumbering up the trail towards the Overlook entrance, while fast enemies leap from the platform behind. This scene requires a degree of coordination and situational awareness, which would have been frustrating enough in a cooperative game. Working with an NPC buddy against obviously timed waves of enemies, it becomes a bit of a slog. especially because the kidnapper never seems to realize that it's pointless to shoot at a shielded Taken. Sure, we can direct his aim, but not his timing. So he frequently ends up wasting precious moments of unshielded time reloading his gun. It's one of those situations where I understand the tone and the structure that the game developers were aiming for, but I think the fight could have been refined into a better experience with just a few small changes. If we play carefully, using the flashlight to carefully keep the enemies at bay and direct the kidnapper's shots, the standoff does become a fun and challenging last stand. If it was only about the degree of precision in juggling enemies and preserving both flares and batteries until they are absolutely necessary, this could have even been one of my favorite sequences in episode 2. But it isn't just that. Multiple Taken manage to leap down onto the platform from a high rock or clamber up the side railing, making it a challenge to keep track of all of the enemies. Worse, players have to contend with that cinematic camera, which interrupts the action at times to show Taken scaling the railings, only to hand control back without enough time to turn and fight them. As an action game, we need a set-piece combat moment, especially after disempowering the player. As a horror story, we need overwhelming odds so the player feels the challenge. As a narrative, we need to overcome those odds and just barely survive. Which we do thanks to our brand new buddy, the Kidnapper, who gleefully fights the Taken, unfazed by the overwhelming odds, because he's read the story. And he thinks he knows how it ends. You're going to bring about something glorious and terrible, the Kidnapper proclaims, after narrowly surviving the onslaught with us. You'll do this once we get you some proper editorial control. In the internal logic of this story, this editorial control is necessary because the kidnapper wants Alan to release the woman in black from her prison in Cauldron Lake, continuing something strange and terrible which occurred long ago. When we step outside of the story and think of the actual experience of playing Alan Wake, I feel like the phrase glorious and terrible absolutely applies. From the uneven combat sequences to the pacing of the narrative, Alan Wake uses a strong structure to draw us deeper and deeper into the story. The more challenges it presents, the more clues it drops, the more I want to know about the twisted world of Bright Falls. Even if the actual minute-to-minute experience often verges into the frustrating. I suppose that's part of what makes Alan Wake linger in my mind, though. Because for all of its faults, it's a game that was trying to tell a story in a particular way. It wasn't the first game to lean into the tropes of low-budget horror by any means, and it isn't even the first to be based on novelistic storytelling. But it has a confidence in its narrative that is equal parts inspiring and frustrating. It's a game that knows what it wants to be. And it really does forge its own path through the darkness of game design and narratives, even if that path is often winding and a bit uneven. Thank you for joining me today, folks, for this episode of my exhaustive analysis of Alan Wake. I'm Andrew Link. I would love if you would take a moment now to like and subscribe here on YouTube and possibly share this video with everyone you know. I really enjoy explaining my feelings about the games that I love. And I'd love to hear how you feel about these games. And in particular, how do you feel about either the experience I have presented or your own experiences playing through this first half of episode 2 of Alan Wake? Have a wonderful week, and I look forward to seeing your comments down below.